The sleep of reason brings forth monsters.
I'm a whiner, and I keep whining and whining until I win.
Maybe somebody will rise up.
We must not confuse dissent with disloyalty.
Welcome to Swing State, an aggressive, progressive, critical, and political podcast from the middle of the Midwest. Hi, welcome back to Swing State. I'm Luane.
I'm AJ.
And unless you've been in a coma for the last couple weeks, you know there's been some Trump-Russia revelations. So we've decided to forego the broadside and get right into it. If you don't want to wade into that swamp with us, we understand. So before you go, remember that net neutrality is being threatened again, and Mitch McConnell is going to take another run at Trumpcare. So get on your phones, bitch at your congresspersons, tell them to stop trying to do as much harm as they can. After all, we couldn't even talk about Merrick Garland getting a Supreme Court seat while the Obama administration wound down. Maybe don't make any major decisions while the president and his family are all under investigation. So, despite all the protestations to the contrary that there was no collusion, no connection, no communication, I present to you Swing State's first performance art piece, The Confession, written by Donald Trump Jr. and performed by AJ.
June 3, 2016, 10:36 a.m. Rob Goldstone. Good morning. Emin just called and asked me to contact you with something very interesting. The Crown Prosecutor of Russia met with his father Aras this morning, and in their meeting offered to provide the Trump campaign with some official documents and information that would incriminate Hillary in her dealings with Russia and would be very useful to your father. This is obviously very high-level and sensitive information, but is a part of Russia and its government support for Mr. Trump, and helped along by Aras and Emin. What do you think is the best way to handle this information? And would you be able to speak to Emin about it directly? I can also send this info to your father via Rona, but it is ultra-sensitive, so wanted to send to you first. Best, Rob Goldstone. June 3, 2016, 10:53 a.m. Donald Trump Jr. Thanks, Rob. I appreciate that. I'm on the road at the moment, but perhaps I just speak to Emin first. Seems we have some time, and if it's what you say, I love it. Especially later in the summer. Could we do a call first thing next week? When I'm back, best, Don.
How did he say he felt about this information?
He seemed to express a great deal of positivity towards the idea of the Russian government helping his father get elected as president by using potentially stolen information. Don Jr. may have another problem. I'm just going to quick pivot over to an NBC article. Federal investigators might have reason to examine whether Donald Trump Jr., the eldest son of the president, broke campaign finance law when he attended a meeting with a Russian lawyer who he believed would offer damaging information about Hillary Clinton, legal experts told NBC News. Trump Jr., who has claimed that there was nothing untoward about the meeting last summer, may have violated a federal statute that says a political campaign cannot, quote, knowingly solicit, accept, or receive any contribution or donation from a foreign national, experts said. Whoops. Just to put one little cherry on this shit sundae for the Trump team, that little performance art exchange that we read, that was CC'd to Jared Kushner and Paul Manafort.
Oh.
So it's not just Donald Jr. People have been asking us for, months and months, or at least, and I present my opinion that I think that the president will ultimately face his demise because of this story. Where's the evidence of collusion? What are they going to have on him? Here it is, in an email chain.
Seems pretty straightforward. Here's the part of it that sort of floored me when I saw it. Don Jr. released it.
He released it when he was called by the New York Times, and they asked him to give a quote because they also had the emails and were set to release it.
He released it, basically in response to them, to sort of get ahead of the story, and the end result is he's the fucking story. How has the right responded? What about Hillary?
Can we stop with the what about Hillary? What is it going to take just for that one to retire?
Here are the reasons why I'm not super concerned about Hillary. First of all, she's nothing now. She's not in charge of the country. She's not the president. Even if it was something worth prosecuting her for, fine, you prosecute her. Second of all, it's the Ukraine. The difference between the Ukraine and Russia is that the Ukraine is more or less an ally, and Russia not so much. Third, it's a guy saying, I have some information that was the byproduct of an investigation of something we were doing. Is this information useful to you? As opposed to a concerted effort by the president of a hostile foreign nation to manipulate our elections.
With the knowledge and coordination and collusion and assistance of American citizens who then went on to occupy the highest office in the land.
What about Hillary? Who gives a fuck? It's the two coquet response that they always have whenever they get caught with their fingers in the fucking pie. Well, they did it too. Well, one, who gives a fuck? And two, not really.
If just to not have to waste the time on it, I'll accept that the worst case scenario is true. And then I will stick this problem into the mountain of problems that I already have. And it's not first in line, it's not second, it's like 356th. If there does turn out to be some criminal element to it that is so nefarious that it just demands a swift legal response, okay, I'll be the first to admit that that's going to happen. But for right now, the thing that we've been waiting for and we've been talking about and predicting, and the link has been made. There is officially a connection between Vladimir Putin down a chain of Russians. It crosses over to a chain of Americans and reaches to Donald Trump. And it is clear and it is connected and it is on paper. And in this particular case, the idiot-in-chief's son published it himself.
That's sort of been our joke. When you're in the kind of trouble they're in, there are a couple things you can do. One of them is shut the fuck up. Let the lawyers do their shit. The other is, why yes, agent, what do you need to know? And he apparently went with publish it in a fucking paper so everybody can read it. This is not fake news. The Times didn't just make the shit up.
This is kind of the part where publications are using the term circular firing squad to refer to the White House staff. Some Republicans are even starting to get a little bit skittish. I'm really just holding my breath at this point, waiting for the worst elements of this to come out because, as we said before, I believe that the money laundering and the money aspect of this will ultimately be the most damaging and significant aspect of the scandal. It is also still the least known.
Here's what I'm hoping for in seeing this is for the Republicans to finally have a way to fucking turn on him. Because they've been basically forcing themselves to grit their teeth while he does everything he does because they don't want to fuck the party loyalty thing. Here's their opportunity to start turning on him. And if that means that he starts losing support for things like the shitty healthcare plan, great. If this is how we can reduce the damage he does while he's still in office, I'm all fucking for it. Because this is their opportunity to be able to point at something concrete and say, look, we can't continue to support the son of a bitch.
Well, then what we need is for every Democrat, left-leaning, progressive person to memorize the following phrase. Until such a time as we know that the president is not a Russian plant, we cannot continue on with any business in government. And I just send like 50 people on TV to repeat that ad nauseum until it becomes true. Fight fire with fire.
Yes. One of the more vocal critics of Trump that I've seen lately among the Republicans has been Lindsey Graham, who's been talking shit about him a lot lately. One of my favorites was after the G20, which I've already begun to think of as the G19 plus fucking Trump. Trump announced that the United States would be pairing up with Russia to create a, quote, impenetrable cybersecurity unit so that election hacking and many other negative things will be guarded.
That's like asking the burglar who broke into your house to set up your security system. The very thought of that is so...
It's insane. Graham, who is a Republican from South Carolina, has said that the idea is, quote, not the dumbest idea I've ever heard, but it's pretty close, end quote. He has also said that Trump is, quote, literally the only person I know of who doesn't believe Russia attacked our election in 2016, end quote. The fact that he would even be willing to say something as bluntly as he has about that idea, I think is helpful for everyone, because I think it gives other Republicans the strength to say, this is a terrible fucking idea.
Speaking of Lindsey Graham, I also appreciated when he asked the new FBI director, at his hearing, to remind everyone in Congress that if you ever receive some offer from a hostile foreign power, Donald Trump Jr., the thing you're supposed to do is call the FBI. You don't go, oh, good, some tin pot dictator wants to hand me their foreign intelligence services information to use in our election. That is crazy. I mean, I remember there was a story about Al Gore was given some piece of tape from some unknown entity in the 2000 election, and he immediately turned that over to the FBI. Like I said before, this is it. It's what we've been waiting for, and here it is. And this Lloyd's question about what is the right wing going to do now, that is very interesting, because you have a whole lot of professional class conservatives.
Big C conservatives.
Yes. They go on the radio every day and have excused and defended and explained away and mystified and stupid stupefied their audience to try and distract them from the obvious reality, because this thing has been building for months. But what are those people going to do whose living depends on defending Donald Trump? It's about to be a bumpy ride.
Can't get enough Swing State in your life? Follow us on Twitter at swingstate_show. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/swingstateshow. Check out back episodes, our blog, and whatever other things don't fit on the podcast at swingstateshow.wordpress.com. That includes links to past episodes and individual broadsides on YouTube. If you want to send us love notes or hate mail, shoot it to swingstateshow@gmail.com. Thanks to all of you who listen, share, and comment. We really appreciate it. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back, everybody. So, one of the things that we have just been struggling with, on just like an intellectual level, I guess you could say, the group of people in this country who are just going to have almost no reaction whatsoever to the news that we just discussed in the first segment, or who are going to happily submerge themselves in whatever pseudo-explanation is floated out by Fox State TV or one of the right-wing blowhards.
Basically, what it kind of comes down to is why all the shit we just talked about isn't going to make the slightest bit of difference to them. That's something you and I have talked about before in the show a handful of times. How the fuck is it that these people just can't get this? What stops them from recognizing what the fuck the right is doing to them despite their support? It's frustrating because it feels like we can't get to any of that. And it turns out that a lot of people have had the same issue. We recently came across this RawStory piece entitled Fundamentalism, Racism, Fear, and Propaganda. An insider explains why rural, Christian, white America will never change. If you follow us on Facebook, you've probably seen the link that I've posted to this. If you don't follow us on Facebook, I'll include a link in the show notes so you can read through it, because this is a long piece, but we're going to kind of break down a little bit of it. To begin with, we're going to read some of it directly, and then we'll comment on some of the things.
So here's the first little bit to kind of outline what the larger piece is about. As the aftermath of the election of Donald Trump is still being sorted out, a common theme keeps cropping up from all sides. Democrats failed to understand white working class flyover America. Trump supporters are saying this. Progressive pundits are saying this. Talking heads across all forms of media are saying this. Even some Democratic leaders are saying this. It doesn't matter how many people say it. It is complete bullshit. It is an intellectual/linguistic sleight of hand meant to throw attention away from the real problem. The real problem isn't East Coast elites who don't understand or care about rural America. The real problem is rural America doesn't understand the causes of their own situations and fears, and they have shown no interest in finding out. They don't want to know why they feel the way they do or why they are struggling, because they don't want to admit it is in large part because of the choices they've made and the horrible things they've allowed themselves to believe.
This is the same group of people who are constantly telling us about personal responsibility and why it's always someone's moral failings when their life is shit. And then, in that same position, are looking to blame it on somebody, anybody else but themselves.
The part that amazed me in the beginning, when Donald Trump was first sort of coming to the fore of the Republican pack, was when all of the sudden it was in vogue now on the right to both lambaste the Iraq War and free trade and outsourcing. Because going back to Ronnie Union Buster Reagan and the neoliberal period since around 1980 or so, where we've seen jobs shipped overseas, etc., that was their party, with the aid of Democrats, of course, but led largely by Republican think tanks and economic quote-unquote theories, that presented us with this situation in the first place. And there is just no understanding or acceptance of that at all. Or if there is no connection between the, oh, I voted for this and this was the result, therefore I have some share of the responsibility of it.
Partly because people don't understand economics. Even people at high levels don't understand economics. I mean, Rick Perry recently tried to make some comment regarding supply and demand and fucked it up. And he's a cabinet member, but I think he also got a D in economics in college. So to sort of bring us back to the RawStory piece, there's a bullet point list at the end that sort of encompasses the too long didn't read element of it. This list, while not comprehensive, certainly encompasses most of the biggest issues. And it's all shit that the rural Christian white American can't accept. This piece argues, and I think we would as well. Until they do, they're not going to change. It doesn't matter how much we try and understand them. It doesn't matter how much we try to take their feelings or their thoughts or their concerns into account. It won't change.
If I could just butt in for a second on that one, I've always kind of gotten a chuckle out of the idea on the left that there needs to be some special outreach to understand the plight of this or that individual. But there is never like the attending expectation that they are going to do the same. Because if you've ever spent a day listening to Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, Mark Levin, etc., or watched a few weeks of Fox News, it's not exactly the practice on the right to worry too much about what Democrats think for real. That's why you have Alan Colmes sitting next to Sean Hannity for a few years. It's why you have Bob Beckel is like the village liberal at Fox News, or what passes for the best arguments progressives can muster, the best example. It's just not an honest game. So like this whole thing, like as the author here was saying in the beginning, it always smacked to me of bullshit, this we need to worry about working class white voters in the sense that, you know, they're not expected to do the same. Of course we need to worry about them, but there should be an expectation that if we're going to educate ourselves on your plight and your beliefs, you ought to try and do the same.
Here's the difference in thinking that we need to have on this. We don't need to try to understand them. We already understand enough. What we need to do, particularly on the left, is point out, if not that the right did all of this shit to you, then what we need to do is point out that the left is trying to save you from this. That our policies are meant to improve the very things that are causing you this harm. Because right now, all they keep hearing is how it's all the liberals' fault that all of this shit happened, or it's whatever, pick a group. If the left is going to have any success, and I know that this is a supremely optimistic position, but if the left is going to have any chance, they have to get across to these people, we are the ones who are protecting you. We are the ones who are doing things to help you. We are the ones trying to correct the very things you have voted for by voting for people on the right. Now, odds are good. Most of them are never going to get that, and there's nothing we can do about it. But we can't not try it because, well, frankly, it's the fucking truth. It is the reality. We're confronting them with reality.
Which side is on what of net neutrality? Once you figure that out, you've figured out pretty much the entire game, as far as I'm concerned. Who really represents who in this world? Which side would like to prevent net neutrality from being completely deconstructed, and which side is pushing as aggressively as possible to give corporations, especially in the internet domain, as much power as possible, as quickly as possible, despite the polls to the contrary. This article presents a list of things that we need to somehow get across to white working class America before this sort of conciliation can begin. That's the real point here, because I think that there is just a foolish expectation that you can walk up to people who don't even care what the facts and the truth are and somehow reason or understand or empathize with that. It's not a completely realistic proposition as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, there's a conversation I had recently with somebody who said that the reason they don't get into arguments on Facebook or that type of stuff, I mean, aside from the obvious ones, are in many cases, they don't have the time to get the person they're arguing with even up to a basic level of education to make an argument. It's just not worth the effort at that point.
And I believe that the list that Luane is going to read for you might outline why this challenge is so massive, because there are a number of things that the political right really needs to learn to face.
So first off, their economic situation is largely the result of voting for supply-side economic policies. Now, we all know that that's just a redistribution program. It takes all the money from the bottom and shoves it up to the top. And none of that shit trickles down. It hasn't trickled down since Reagan. We all know that. That's why we're not on the right.
But yet the prevailing wisdom in Washington is if you even mention on the left a tax increase for anyone, it's tantamount to political suicide. That narrative has to change.
Despite the fact that taxes are how shit gets paid for.
Including the military everybody loves. But anyway.
Immigrants haven't taken their jobs. If all immigrants, legal or otherwise, were removed from the U.S., our economy comes to a screeching halt, and prices on food in particular soar.
And that's just a start. Our tech industries would implode.
Oh yeah, we're fine.
A lot of what we import from abroad is high-skilled workers.
Because white rural workers can't do the shit that we need done.
Because they don't have the education infrastructure that would prepare them for the jobs of tomorrow.
Yes. You can't take a guy out of a mine and put him in front of a computer and expect him to do your tech shit without some sort of training or education.
Yeah. And if you're not willing to invest in public education from the basically preschool to advanced college stages, you are just not competing with some of the best countries in the world. You're not even on the map.
Because we don't value education.
But anyway, moving on.
Immigrants, again, are not responsible for companies moving their plants overseas. This strikes me as fairly obvious to anybody, because the immigrants are not the ones making that decision. It's, as the article puts it, exclusively white business owners who are the ones responsible because they care more about their shareholders, who are also mostly white, than they do about the workers.
This one reminds me of the absolutely insane logic you have to use to sort of blame South American countries for the drug war and the drug problem, when America is the largest importer of, illegal narcotics, maybe anywhere. Yeah. It's all backwards.
We're going to spend a lot of time going, none of this is real. But that's just it. That's what we're dealing with here. The next one's really short and simple. No one's coming for your fucking guns. Okay? They're just not. The worst proposal during the Obama administration was to tighten background checks. Nobody rounded up guns. Nobody banned guns. None of that shit. It's never going to happen.
And it's insane because forget coming for your guns. The very thought of making any legislation pertaining to guns immediately triggers the NRA, which is one of the largest and most influential lobbying organizations in the country. Immediately, you will see pushback and money dumped against you. It's like touching the NHS in Britain or something. You just don't go near it.
And let's be honest, if anything, gun restrictions have been loosening. There are more and more states where you can just carry a gun. Yeah. Without anybody even looking at you. This is another one I've never understood. Gay people getting married is not a threat to your freedom to believe whatever stupid shit you want. It isn't. No one's going to make your church marry gay people. They're not going to make you have a gay pastor. They're not going to make you have gays in your church, okay? They're just not. Because first of all, churches themselves are a fucking powerful lobby. And two, nobody gives a shit about your shitty little church.
Well, and then third, how sad is it that you have to be reassured about something like this? Like, you're supposed to be all about the outcasts, but then, you find out a gay person is your church. Like, we have to reassure you that no one's going to force you to sit next to him. Like, what? Why? What's the problem?
Right. But that also goes back to the sort of hypocrisy when it comes to religion and the right too, because as you pointed out, the least of them. That's who you're supposed to be behind, right? As long as they don't have brown skin, aren't from another country, aren't gay, or any of a number of other things.
I don't see this sort of level of glee if they were like successful in not making you sit next to somebody who's had a divorce, which is also a sin, quote unquote. It's amazing how they select which ones they need to get ultra amped about. And it's always like the most theoretical things like abortion or gay marriage or something like that.
That have nothing to do with them. You don't want to have an abortion? Don't have a fucking abortion.
Man, you guys should have been around here when the Iowa Supreme Court was working on gay marriage. You would have thought the world was going to end, but I remember the sun going down the night before the decision was made, going to sleep, waking up the next morning after the decision went into effect, and it was just the same as yesterday, and it has been the same ever fucking since.
Hey, and you know what else happened? More weddings means more money in our economy.
Oh, well, pity there.
This is another of my favorites. Women having access to birth control doesn't affect your life in the slightest, and it really kind of cuts down on those teenage mothers that you all hate. You know what also goes along with this, and I don't know if it's mentioned here later in the article, fucking sex ed.
Yeah.
Abstinence only doesn't work. That's not even a question.
Yeah.
That's not even a supposition. That's not theoretical. It doesn't work. Every statistical marker tells you it doesn't work to have people be less educated about something related to sex.
Yeah, and just abstain from biological need. It's like asking a teenager to not piss until he's married. Like, I'm sorry, it just doesn't work like that. It's not the way the body, the brain, the ape species is. And the fact that you want it to be is, to me, a little scary.
Well, and I think the other thing that always bothered me about the religious message of it was sort of summed up in something I think I posted on one of the atheist websites. Sex is the most horrible, dirty, filthy thing you could ever do, and you should save it for someone you love. Make up your fucking minds, people. Because here's the deal. Everybody fucks. If they get the chance, they will do it.
Going on in the list of things conservatives are going to need to accept if we're going to have a conciliation down the road. Blacks are not lazy moochers living off their hard-earned tax dollars any more than many of your fellow rural neighbors. People that are in need are in need. People who can't find jobs because of their circumstances, a changing economy, outsourcing overseas, I can add automation and a whole host of other shit in there, belong to all races.
Yeah, if you have a white population that suddenly gets downsized out of a job, then you have a bunch of white people on welfare. If you have a bunch of African American people that suddenly gets downsized out of a job, well, then you're going to have a bunch of black people on welfare. It doesn't matter. It's a matter of circumstance. It's not a matter of race.
And as I think it was last week, we read to you from the list of the poorest states. They're basically all Southern or Midwestern Republican, solidly Republican conservative states.
So you want to know where your welfare money is going? that's where it's fucking going. Speaking of welfare, they get a tremendous amount of help from a government they complain does nothing for them. From the roads and utility grids they use, to farm subsidies, crop insurance, commodities protections. They benefit greatly from government assistance. The Farm Bill is one of the largest financial expenditures by the U.S. government. That's coming from somebody in a farm state, and I know that, and I recognize that. And I also know that without those protections, that crop insurance and the commodities protection, you have a bad fucking year, and you have a state full of people with no money. So yeah, I'm willing to throw a little money at that if it means that we're not going to have farmers on welfare too.
And along with this one is I've always just been amazed at their inability to diagnose the problems with the budget. If you just look historically at where we were at the end of 2000 with the Clinton surpluses, and then you look at what happened during especially the beginning of the Bush administration, where we had the 2 tax cuts on the wealthy simultaneously with 2 wars overseas, which we, I guess, just put on the credit card. The inability for conservatives to ever account for that thinking when it comes to the military or our foreign policy, it's not even a consideration. Now, I'm not trying to give an argument here on is the military too big, too small. That's a whole other day. But the fact remains that your tax dollars go towards the military, the police, the roads, the bridges, NASA, all of the things you like. The internet originates back to a defense contract. You could go on all day. And if you look at countries that have high taxation, people do pay more, maybe on average, but they also tend to have public transportation. They have
healthcare.
They have healthcare, universal healthcare. They often have free education from basically cradle to grave. You can go to school.
Higher level education.
Yes.
Because again, those countries recognize the value of the education and the value of an educated populace, because that benefits the nation as a whole. You have a better education, you get a better job. You get a better job, you have more money. You can pay more into the system to help take care of yourself and other people. At the end of the day, when people do better, everybody does better.
More things on the list. They get the largest share of food stamps, Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security.
Welfare people.
Yeah. They complain about globalization, but line up like everyone else to get the latest Apple product. They have no problem buying foreign-made guns, scopes, and hunting equipment. Don't think twice about trucks whose engine was made in Canada, tires in Japan, etc., and so forth. This is my favorite. They use illicit drugs as much as any other group, but when other people do it, it is a, quote, moral failing, and they should be severely punished. When they do it, it's a health crisis, and they need sympathy and attention, and man,
oh my God,
do not think that the black community has missed the coverage of the so-called opioid epidemic. White doctors prescribing shady shit, addicting patients across the country in rural white states especially.
And again, we're not going to get into a whole thing about legalizing drugs because that's a whole other fucking topic as well.
It's just interesting to note the language that is used.
Oh, yeah.
The crack cocaine epidemic versus the opioid epidemic. One gave rise to the notion of a super predator. The other needs to be treated with the most understanding. And actually, I think both need to be treated with understanding when it comes to drugs. But like I said, it is not lost on either myself or the black community especially what this looks like.
Now, this sort of goes back to some of the economy stuff we were talking about before. When jobs dry up for whatever, it doesn't matter what the reason is, they refuse to relocate and then lecture the poor people in places like Flint for staying in towns that are failing. And the number of times I heard after Hurricane Katrina that why the hell didn't they just leave New Orleans? You cannot go anywhere in the United States without a fucking car and money. You just can't. And if you're poor, you're just fucked. Here's the thing. I had a parent in the military. I moved a shit ton of times. That's never an easy experience, and it's never cheap. Now imagine you have a day or two because there's a fucking hurricane coming to do that. Pack all your shit up and take off. Or just take off. Oh, wait, I gotta find a vehicle. And do I have any money for anything that I mean, come on. What the fuck?
They are quick to judge minorities for being welfare moochers, but don't think twice about cashing their checks every month. They complain about coastal liberals, but the taxes from California and New York are what covers their farm subsidies, helps maintain their highways, and keeps their hospitals and their sparsely populated areas open for business.
Let's revisit that for a second, because that goes back to the taxes thing we were talking about. California and New York. Why? Because they have massive populations.
They're coastal states,
and
ports, trade.
Right. And they have people who have a lot of money, which means they bring in more in taxes. And let's be honest, if you're a hillbilly in Mississippi without a job, or you're a lawyer in New York or California, who do you think is contributing more to the tax pool?
Speaking of the tax pool, they complain about the little man being run out of business, then turn around and shop at big box stores.
Yeah, that kind of goes back to that economics when it comes to being shipped overseas, too. You bitch about that, but you don't want to pay for what it would cost to have this stuff made here.
They make sure outsiders are not welcome, deny businesses permits to build, then complain about businesses' plants opening in less rural areas. Government has not done enough to help them in many cases, but their local and state governments are almost completely Republican, and so too are their representatives and senators. Instead of holding them accountable, they vote them in over and over and over again.
All the economic policies and ideas that could help rural America, and this is the important part, belong to the Democratic Party. Raising the minimum wage, strengthening unions, infrastructure spending, reusable energy growth, slowing down the damage done by climate change, healthcare reform. All of those are fucking progressive ideas. Every single fucking one.
You will be fought to the death by the Republican Party if you try and move on any of them. You look at the wage restrictions that were put in place here in Iowa by Republicans to purposely suppress the minimum wage so that not even local cities and towns and counties could do anything about it because they don't actually believe in any of this federalist shit. That's all just a ruse. What they want is control and power for those who already have money, power, and control.
Let me repeat again. All these ideas belong. It says Democratic Party. Sure, they're probably the biggest representatives of it. These are progressive ideas. These are liberal ideas. These are ideas of the left. These are not ever ideas of the right. And the reason why is because these are compassionate ideas. These are ideas that recognize human beings exist and they need to have a certain standard of living just to survive, let alone thrive. The right does not give a shit. The right is driven by money, controlled by money, and the people making the decisions are people with money. You may call yourself a Republican, but if you don't have money, you don't count. It doesn't matter. You have no power. The Republican Party doesn't need you except when they need somebody to pull a fucking lever or fill in a dot.
And it's the same party that is constructing and reconstructing the voting mechanisms and the districts to give themselves an advantage so that they need you even less, so that their victories can just be assured from the beginning because of the way they set up the board. But I want to repeat and emphasize the progressive left is where the policies are. And if you want to have the argument about whether or not a single payer healthcare system makes sense economically versus what we're doing, have at it. I'd love to have that argument.
Yes, please.
Let's
legitimately.
Let's have that argument all the way from now to 2018 to 2020. Let's keep having the argument as to why we need to figure out how to pay insurance premiums instead of just having the government negotiate for drugs and put an end to this bullshit. We can have that argument. We can have the argument about why we're the only industrialized country to not guarantee healthcare as a human right.
We can have that argument about why the hell we're the only ones who are still trying to convince people that coal is the way to go for energy.
Or that there is no sense in continuing this drug war, which has led to not even the smallest drop in the usage of drugs, whether we're talking about prescription painkillers or illicit drugs from South America. There has been no change whatsoever. In fact, drug use has maybe even risen in some instances during the time the drug war has been enacted.
Well, I'll tell you why on that one. Because now we've privatized prisons.
We can have the private prisons conversation.
At the end of the day, what we're ultimately talking about is the difference between a party and, realistically, a side of the moral argument, the right, that is ultimately a for-profit philosophy.
Human beings are
commodities.
They're commodities. Yeah.
And the left, in which they are human beings, who deserve respect simply for being human beings. And what we need to do is get across to these people that difference. Because contrary to most, I think, right-leaning people's belief and most Republican belief, you're never going to be one of the people with the money and the power. Supporting the people with the money and the power because someday you may be one of those people, that's not enough reason to do it. Because as you're sitting there in your shack on welfare, I don't think you're going to make that leap. The progressive left, on the other hand, is going to see you sitting in your shack and go, okay, well, what can we do to help you get there? How much do I have to pay into my taxes to help you have a better life? Because here's the deal. I'm willing to do that because I've seen what it would actually cost me to do some of these things. If we just reconfigure how we spend some money and accept that maybe we'll have to pay a little more, I don't give a shit. If I have to pay a little more, so literally every human being in this fucking country has adequate health care,
including myself,
fine. I don't care. If that's what I have to do, fine. If that's what it takes for our country to finally drag itself up to where most of the industrialized nations are, fine.
I can't even tell you how happy I would be to find out that my taxes went up by 10%, but I also now know that I'm no longer responsible for dealing with this healthcare situation every 6 months or year, every time I switch jobs. I mean, what I wouldn't give to just have a system where I left this one job, I'm covered. I got a new job, I'm covered. I don't have any job, I'm covered. Because life is life. And that's the one thing about the conservative philosophy. It doesn't want to understand that regardless of what we do with healthcare, somebody at the emergency room is going to have to pay the piper for administering the drugs for a person who doesn't have health insurance. We're going to pay. It's just a matter of, are we going to do it the smart way and the hard way, or are we going to do it the American insurance model way? There are so many things that we have to get across to this group of people, and like the article sort of laments, and like LaWayne and I have been just banging our heads against a wall watching this con man of a president rise and now potentially fall. I don't know what it's going to take to convince some people, because it's like one of my luminaries, RN Raw, is fond of saying, faith is not only what you don't know, it's what you won't know, and politics seems to work a lot like that a lot of the time, where people they don't know the information and they don't want to know the information, and that is seen as socially okay.
On that note, until next time, organize, mobilize, protest,
vote.